Andy, let's kick off with the Sunday Telegraph, should we? And Nigel Farage talking about these splits in his party.
Yeah, and usually for a Sunday paper, they've got both sides of the story. They've got Farage and they've got Rupert Lowe, and they're almost Punch and Judy about where they are on their position. So if we don't already know, Rupert Lowe is been kicked out of the Reform Party. He's one of the most popular, most visible figures behind Nigel Farage. Chronology of events: Rupert Lowe criticised the leadership a few weeks ago, saying they lacked a bit of direction, they lacked policy. And then suddenly these stories have come out, whether they've been leaked tactically. That's certainly the accusation from Rupert Lowe, who denies all charges, that he was, misogynistic remarks towards female staff and that he'd threatened on more than one occasion the Reform Party Reform Party chairman, Zia Youssef. Rupert Lowe absolutely denies all these things, but Farage has written a comment piece and Rupert Lowe's replied himself on Telegraph Online. He said that he had to kick Rupert Lowe out of the party to save the party, keep the unity. But look,
Well, if allegations are made, they've got to be investigated.
Well,
yes, they have,
investigate, but kicking somebody out of the party before they've necessarily been... The investigation's been entirely
completed. I suppose that's the point, because he hadn't been found guilty of anything at this stage.
No, but there's obviously a lot of animosity has been building up over some time.
Yeah, quite. Rupert Lowe's become more and more high profile in that party. He's very, very, very active on social media. He's always calling out what I'd call common sense views. He demands to get data and costs on asylum seekers, data and costs on crime figures and things like that. And also he gives his parliamentary salary to charity.
Yes, everyone goes on about that. Well, everybody goes on about that.
Plenty of richer people don't.
No, but plenty of richer people do. I mean, look, Margaret Thatcher, she never took a wage for being Prime Minister.
I think what's really interesting about the critique by Rupert Lowe is that he spoke about people and policy. And if one looks at the Reform Party, or indeed any of our political parties, the two challenges that they face, which they're all potentially failing right now, are having a compelling policy programme that deals with the challenges we face as a country and having good people and attracting and keeping good people. And when he raised that in his original piece last week, which either precipitated this falling out or perhaps was on account of the falling out, it really rang true for me. There are big question marks around the policy platform of reform. We noticed we noticed the immigration policy, which was really ill thought through with the Stop the Boats, and also their energy policy, which lacked logic and rigour. So there is truth to at least some of his criticism.
A lot of us would say that, but it's a bit rich coming from the Tories, isn't it? The Tories have said, we're not going to give you any policies for another couple of years.
Yeah. No, I think it's a challenge for all parties. And I think, we saw with Labour's first 6 or 7 months in office that there was very little meat on the bones in terms of their own policy platform. One would have thought they would have used all those years in opposition well and are only now coming to what they need to do. So I thought it was interesting, Rupert's critique. I thought it had a lot to it. And I think it will have a huge impact.
Yeah, just finally on that, Farage is obviously the central figure in reform, but they've now lost Ben Habib, they've lost Rupert Lowe. If they're serious about getting into government, they have to have a big enough book of MPs to have a health secretary, a chancellor, a deputy prime minister, all of these things. We have to have more familiarity from the party than just Farage. It feels like we're building these figures in reform and then suddenly they're disappearing.
I think that's a really good point, Andy, because at the moment, it's quite a small group of, shall we say, late middle-aged men who are the face of reform. And, how can they attract more people? And that's why I think this story makes a big difference, despite what some columnists in the media have said, because it sends a signal that these people aren't professionals, that it's all a bit amateur. And what message will that send to people out there who are considering getting involved?
We get a lot of messages from people saying, I'm still voting reform because it's the only way I can see out of this, the mess the country's in.
People have truly had enough of the uniparty. We've had Labour, we've had Conservative, all talking tough on immigration, all talking tough on policing, all talking tough on all sorts of things. Reform are at least saying that they're going to have a different stance on immigration. There might be holes in some of those policies.
Isn't the truth that they've got to shut up bickering at each other publicly? They've actually got to mend, but mend quietly now behind closed doors.
Back to Farage. He's broken his silence on the row engulfing reform following the suspension of Rupert Lowe.
Yeah, today he's writing in the Sunday Telegraph. It's on the front page, and he claims the last election shows that the public don't like parties that engage in constant infighting. And he has vowed to ensure that all party representatives behave responsibly.
Well, there have been allegations of bullying and physical violence made against Rupert Lowe. He strongly denies all of that.
And then what followed was public criticism of the party's leadership by the MP for Great Yarmouth, in which Nigel Farage claims that that has very much dented this sense of unity.
Political commentator Duncan Barks is here. What is interesting is, of course, we're getting all this stuff from insiders who say, you know, if you've had anything to do with reform in the last 8 months since the general election, you will have known that there's been a lot of tension between Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe, which is interesting that it's now clearly all coming to the surface.
Yeah. We had Ben Habib on GB News last night. Ben Habib used to be the co-deputy leader of Reform. He was making comments saying that, you know, Nigel needs to let go a little bit of control of the party. I've seen interviews in the last 48 hours with a guy called Howard Cox, who was the Reform London mayoral candidate as well, saying a similar thing. Both Howard and Ben are no longer anything to do with Reform UK. Some people are saying, well, look, there's some evidence there that there are, if you like, wreckage along the way of people who fall out with Nigel Farage and have nothing to do with the party. But I think one of the messages from a viewer earlier does rather sum it up, because if you strip all of this down, it's like, well, if there is a view that Nigel Farage is not the right person to lead Reform and someone else should do it, first off, who is that person? And secondly, outside of the Twitter sphere, if you like, outside of the world of X and social media, which is rampant even this morning, with Reform supporters saying, well, Rupert Lowe's maybe got a point or Nigel Farage has got a point. Outside of that world, in the real world, the only person I believe most people associate with Reform UK is Nigel Farage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And with UKIP, when he moved on from UKIP, it collapsed.
Well, there's something interesting about UKIP, and you're absolutely right. So UKIP, I mean, I was working as a hack at the time, 2011, 2012, and UKIP increasingly was an absolute basket case. And if you talk to Nigel Farage about it, he would say, I couldn't get anything done. I couldn't get policy through. I couldn't sort anything out because there were too many people getting involved, which then brings you round to where the Reform Party is at the moment, and some people saying that he's got his, to use a nautical term, his hand, you know, firmly on the tiller. And you can have some sympathy with that, which is that I've been here before, I've had my fingers burnt with UKIP, I want to make sure we can do the right stuff for Reform.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing surely, I mean, it's odd because they've all weighed in now. Well, not all of them.
Well, Richard Tice has been relatively quiet.
Yes, he has, hasn't he? Which is very interesting, because that's surely the thing to do at the moment, is to mend these broken fences between them, but to do it quietly and not to upset people.
Don't do it on social media. Again, social media is not representative of the real world, but it's still playing out where you've had people who were previous reformers making their points this morning. Yesterday, Lee Anderson, who's the chief whip and the Reform MP, did a statement, and Rupert Lowe was very quick to come back and just say, look, what you said is untrue. All of this is playing out. Now, it gives people like me and us loads of stuff to talk about on the telly on a Sunday morning, but is it the kind of stuff that Reform wants to be talked about?
We say Richard Tice has been quiet.
Well, I haven't seen anything yet.
Well, you will do, because he's going to be on Camilla Tominey's show, I think at 10:15 this morning.
Excellent.
So
well, you say excellent, but surely it's not. They've got to calm down and shut up.
You can't ignore it, though, can you? Got to address it.
I don't know. It's a tightrope, isn't it? Because if he says nothing, people like me go, why haven't you said anything?
Yeah.
And as you rightly say, it's like, well, here's a guy who was, you know, up until recently leader of Reform. It's only right and proper he pops up and gives his view. But all of this has been played out, again online, but also on TV screens across Britain.